everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour, Compilation, Volume 3. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone to please like this video, subscribe to the Darkest Hour, and tap the bell so you never miss a thing. The first few stories tonight are brand new, but all of them, I promise, are haunting. So, let's get started, shall we? I told my girlfriend about this story a while ago. Ever since, we've been obsessed with reading about other people's stories, and we decided to write out mine. I was about 6 years old. Couldn't have been much younger because I'd just started school and lived in Mobile. Any older, I'd already have moved to Montgomery. I thought that I knew a neighborhood girl. I called her Emily. I'd see her a lot in our backyard. I always assumed everyone else could see her too. Sometimes Emily seemed sad, and sometimes she was happy. I was a kid, but I could tell those emotions. I never did much with Emily, maybe building some forts with some old wood and tree branches, brush clippings, kid stuff. I remember she always wanted to go to the woods. I wasn't allowed, so I never did follow her. While we lived there, I would dream about Emily, but I would also have nightmares. She was never trying to scare me in my dreams, but I didn't understand why she was in them. I didn't understand the things that she showed me either. Scenes from the woods. I'd never seen the woods, but I didn't like it. They were dark. In a large brick cylinder thing that poked out of the ground. A house near the cylinder, but it was dark, dilapidated. Once I'd get into the woods, I could hear Emily, but I could never see her. Then I'd wake up. I'd tell my mom the best I could about my nightmare, but usually I would just fall back asleep. The feeling never lasted beyond the nightmare, and often the next night and several following, they would be filled with happy dreams or no dreams at all. Before moving out of that house, I'd asked my mom if we could go into the woods so I could say goodbye to Emily. I told her I was sure that she lived back there. My mom agreed. But I'd only learned later that she truly didn't know who Emily was, and she was just allowing me to act out whatever I was cooking up in my imagination. She walked with me and I saw it. The cylinder. I asked my mom what was that, and she explained it used to be an active water well. She held me up and swung me over the top. I was afraid at first, but I wasn't because it was my mom. I closed my eyes as she plopped me down. "Now it's covered," she said. I opened my eyes and I was standing on top of what was once an open well from my dream. Now it had a metal slotted cover over the top. I squealed for my mom to let me down. She did, and I said to her, "I don't think Emily wants to be here. She should come with us." My mom shook her head, still believing this to be my imagination, and says, "Emily's welcome to come over whenever she wants." I look around. No dilapidated house. Nothing looked too creepy, but I didn't see Emily. I told my mom I wasn't sure where she was, but I had to leave her a note. So we did. "Bye-bye, Emily." Me and my mom both signed it. The very next morning, I found that note. It was right outside the back door, next to our names. Below our message was written, "Bye-bye." I was so excited. I ran to my mom. Instead of excitement, though, she grew an almost grayish color, asking me where I found that. Years later, Mom told me that that was the scariest thing she'd ever experienced. She said, No homes connected to that forest area. Our home was unique in that it was a temporary home built by the owners of that land. The owners, however, lived nowhere near us, nor did anyone else at the time. My mom says she was glad they required us to move because she would have broken any existing lease after that whole thing. Emily, however, did not follow us to Montgomery. I wonder, is she still there? Still trying to figure this one out. For the record, I'm a skeptic. I've had strange experiences in the past, but I'm not someone who will instantly jump to, well, it's gotta be a ghost then. With that out of the way, I want to share what happened last week and ask for some outside opinions. I work a weird job, which means I deal with software development, but also sometimes support physical hardware, so I work on site. My job is based all around problem solving, and I'm good at my job, which is why this puzzle is frustrating me so much. I'm based in an older building. It was built in the 1600s, I believe, with a modern extension that was added about 30 years ago. No one in the new part of the building experiences anything, but many staff who work in the old part are adamant that there are things here. I've had a couple of experiences happen to myself, but I also thought that they were things which could be put down to the mind playing tricks on you. A horrible stink of urine in the old cells in the basement, and a horrible feeling that I was about to be attacked. I decided to leave the basement at that point. Footsteps in the rafters on the main hall. Hearing doors shut from rooms upstairs that you know aren't occupied. Hearing screams coming from the locker rooms, etc. However, last week I saw something happen in front of me. I had to set up some equipment in a function room for some kind of presentation. I got there, set up, and then I waited until the people hosting arrived so I could run through it with them. To describe the layout of the room, it's a medium-sized room, which is often left empty apart from when there's events, and it's got 3 sets of doors in it, 2 sets of double doors to enter, both of which are shut, swipe card access only, and a heavy ordnance door, which leads to the bar entrance, a fire escape, and a door to a separate cellar. It gets to the time that they're supposed to be there, and I want to leave as I've got stuff I need to be working on, but I stay anyways as my manager had asked me to. I sat there waiting, and suddenly the ordnance door next to the bar flies open. And I mean flies open. Not slightly open. It opened nearly fully width before stopping, and then shutting. My immediate thought was, someone just tried to come into the room. They must have seen me and thought that the room was in use, so they walked off. Let me tell you, I wouldn't survive very long in a horror film, as I instantly went to go look, when I realized my immediate thought was wrong, because there's no way to access that area without coming down the staircase, which I would have heard. I open the door, I have a look and listen. Nothing. The door to the bar is shut. No one is there. A cupboard door is open, just a vacuum cleaner in there. The fire escape door is shut. Plus, it's old and stiff, so you definitely would have heard it open and close, as the building is not soundproof. The door to the cellar, locked, once again, would have made noise. The staircase which leads to the old offices, no noise, despite being a location which echoes. Plus, the offices they connect to all have their doors to the staircase shut and locked. I was desperate to come up with a logical explanation, so I thought, maybe there's a draft and that's pushed the door open. That couldn't have been the reason for two factors. Firstly, the door is heavy, probably weighs more than me. For a draft to be strong enough to open that door to the width that it did, I would have had to have felt or heard it. Secondly, I did notice a draft, but it was going towards the door, not against it. The door is a pole door, and from the side that the draft was heading, so it actually would have made the door harder to open. And definitely couldn't have pushed it, as, like I say, the door was a pull from that side. I've shown some of my colleagues the door in question, and they all agree that it doesn't make sense at all. In fact, some say that they've had their own experiences in that room. One manager even says they have staff who refuse to work on my side of the building at night, as they've had things happen and it creeps them out too much. Unfortunately, the room doesn't have CCTV, or I assure you, I would have asked to view the time I was there. I really can't come up with an explanation. Has anyone got any ideas? So this house my family lived in was supposedly built in the late 17 to early 1800s. It's a 3-story house that was converted into a duplex. The lowest level was the first apartment, while the top 2 were the second. My family of 6 occupied the second apartment. The first floor of the second apartment had my parents' bedroom, the living room, kitchen, and restroom, while the next floor up had just 3 rooms. 2 on either side of what we called the middle room belonged to us kids. This is where it's going to get kind of confusing because of the layout of the second apartment. The front door was immediately met with a flight of stairs that turned just once onto a landing that led to the main floor of the apartment. To the left was the bathroom, and further back was the kitchen. And if you were to keep walking, there would be a living room to your right, my parents' bedroom to your left. Then, there was the second flight of stairs that was closed off by a door that led up to the bedrooms that us kids stayed in. Anyway, since this was a very old house and poorly renovated over the years, it was horribly insulated and there wasn't central air or heat on the top floor. Summers were excruciatingly hot and winters were bone-chillingly cold. So my sister Sarah and I moved downstairs and slept in the living room. My brothers Ben and Andy were a few years older than us girls. I think they wanted to maintain a sense of independence, so they stayed upstairs, relying on fans and blankets. Andy moved into mine and Sarah's old room, but Ben stayed in his. Ben would experience things nearly every night in his room. He would hear things move and the door would creep open or slam shut. He'd hear low, indistinct speaking and feel an oppressive energy in his room. I think his room is where the most activity was. It wasn't always malicious, but Ben did feel unwelcomed quite often in his room. Andy, on the other hand, didn't seem to experience the same things in the room that he stayed in. But he did tell me of a time that he was up late one night playing video games with the door open. He said it was dark aside from the light coming from his TV. But when he looked into the doorway, he just felt something staring at him. Something felt wrong. He looked over at our cat. Her hair was standing on end, and she was growling, a low growl, something she would never do unprovoked. He ran downstairs with the cat, and neither of them would ever go back up there alone, and especially at night. Our cat would literally sit at the bottom of the stairs and hiss or growl after that. Andy started sleeping in the living room after that, and eventually Ben did too. so the top 3 rooms were just converted into storage. We only went up there for decorations or VHS tapes that we stored on the shelf in the middle room. And that's when we started hearing walking, stomping, and the shutting of doors upstairs. It was unsettling, but we all just blamed it on the house settling to claim some peace of mind. Shortly after we'd all relocated to the living room, I developed seizure disorders, painful migraines, and these horrific, reoccurring night terrors. Nearly every night I'd have a night terror that no child should be having. I wasn't really exposed to horror or paranormal movies, yet I had these gory and demonic night terrors. One consisted of mutilated corpses, body parts strung up all around the house, and then another would be me running from an evil entity all around the house. It was horrible. The migraines and seizures were just as unexplainable. No medical history in my family with either. I began seeing shadow people around the house. The first one I saw was from the bathroom as I sat in the bath. Since I was having seizures fairly frequently, I wasn't allowed to be unsupervised in the house, especially in the shower or bath, so I would leave the door ajar just in case. Well, one night, I looked up to see a cloaked shadow pass by and head downstairs to the front door. My brothers weren't home and everyone else was in my parents' room. A few months after that, I was kneeled down in that same spot that the shadow passed by, and I heard a whisper in my ear. Nobody was around. I've even seen one with my sister as it rushed by the window in our front door. My mother and oldest brother would see them too, but they never really went into detail about that. Something else that would happen was they would mimic us. My mother has seen one take the appearance of my older brother Ben. Ben has seen one take on my appearance, and I've seen one take Andy's appearance. They never did anything in particular. Really, they were just there 1 minute and gone the next. The one I saw was of Andy. I was leaving the restroom and the door swung out towards the kitchen. So just in the crack of the door, I could see Andy sitting in the kitchen. But he looked different. He was blue. I know it sounds insane, but he was just this pale blue color. I called out his name because he was looking down at his Game Boy Advance. And when he looked up, I just felt this overwhelming wave of sadness wash over me. And as I looked at what I thought was Andy, he just looked so sad. It was such a devastating feeling that I tear up every time I talk about this encounter. Another time I'd seen something strange was when I was put in timeout. One of the timeout spots was on the staircase that led to the second floor. As I mentioned earlier, it has a door that's closed off from the main floor. And at this time I was crying pretty loudly, so my brother Ben shut the door. And I was left in the staircase in relative darkness. Relative as the light bulb was out, but there was light coming in from one of the bedroom windows. I looked up for some reason and was met with some shadowy figure staring down at me. And I know that doesn't make sense because you think of shadow people as these dark masses of shadow with no distinguishing features, but this one had white eyes. It almost seemed to be staring down at me, inquisitively. It didn't feel evil, but I was just a kid, so I can't say if I was good at reading intentions. That being said, it still scared the absolute shit out of me, because I'd never seen anything like that. My dad used to sit on the porch, and quite a few times he said that locals would come by and ask if he lived there. When he told them that he did, they'd all have some sort of story about how the home was haunted. Apparently, a man lived there with his 2 sons. One was disabled and the other was a horrible man. He was violent and mean. Eventually, both boys ended up passing, one of them in the house. Their father lived out his days there as well. We did move from that house around the time I was 15 or 16, and even on our last day there, the spirits were still active. My brother asked 2 of his friends to help move things from the old bedrooms upstairs, and they both heard or saw something upstairs in Ben's old room. One of them thought he'd heard Andy call for him while Andy was actually outside, and the other saw a man with his face buried in his hands as he sat on an old mattress. They both refused to go upstairs after that, understandably. As for the man or apparition, it's speculated by my own dad that it was the father of the 2 boys. It's funny because before we lived there, my dad was a solid skeptic of spirits. Now, not so much. As for my unexplained seizures, migraines, and night terrors, they all stopped shortly before we left that house, which I'm thankful for because I sleep easier now. And one of the seizures I had was so bad, I stopped breathing twice and spent 3 days in the hospital. If you're wondering about the first floor apartment having activity, it was so bad down there that we couldn't keep a tenant for more than a half a year or so at a time. One woman even refused to sleep in her apartment after she said she was strangled with her blanket and told to get out. She literally slept on the porch and hung bottles of holy water on both of our doorknobs. I truly did feel bad for her. It was a very scary experience living in that home. At times, it just sucked feeling uninvited in your own home. There's something I didn't mention, mostly because the diagnosis itself seemed like it was unrelated to the house, but I say it could be unrelated because my dad made poor lifestyle choices when it came to his health. He wasn't active, ate poorly, and smoked daily. Anyway, shortly after his diagnosis, he got pretty sick. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it was the heart medication he was on or the condition itself, but he was bedridden for a week or so. And towards the end of whatever made him sick, he said that he woke up to a man standing over his bed. The man stared at him for a moment and told him everything was going to be all right before disappearing. My dad recovered after that. He still has the heart condition, but whatever happened that night with the man, it made him miraculously recover, as he puts it. The man that my dad saw looked the same as the one my brother's friend described seeing in the attic before we left. I don't know what all was in that house. I can say that some of it was evil, but there was something or someone there that seemed to look out for us too. I grew up on a small farm in south-central Pennsylvania. Our house was built in the mid to late 1800s and had several occupants before my parents moved in, one of which we believe stuck around after death. We called this entity Joe, after a farmer that lived there that was killed in an accident not far from the house. Both my family and several friends had seen Joe around the property. Joe would appear in a window of the old barn before the barn was destroyed. He would also make his presence known around the house, moving things, whispering, and occasionally manifesting himself for people to see. He appeared for a group of people that we had visiting in the early 90s. This was faculty from a boarding school my mother taught at. Several of the teachers asked who the old man standing on our second-floor balcony was. They all thought that he was a new teacher at the school, but when they asked my mom and went to show her the man, he was gone. My first time seeing Joe was also in the early 90s. I had heard him and seen things moving on their own since I was a kid, but never actually saw him before. This was when I was in high school, maybe grade 9 or 10. I was homesick for the day. My parents were both at work and my brother was off at college. We lived at a crossroad in a 2-story house on 5 acres of land. At the time, we had a small barn with a large pasture for several sheep and goats. The windows of my second-floor bedroom overlooked the barn and pasture to the north and the crossroad to the west. Anyway, at one point in the early afternoon, a noise caught my attention and I peeked out the window to see what it was. The animals had somehow opened one of the gates and escaped the pasture. I groaned and got dressed to get them back into the fenced area. I was sick and did not want to deal with this. Before leaving my room, I looked out the window again, and to my surprise, saw a man herding the animals back into the pasture and latching the gate. He was older, maybe in his 60s or 70s, wearing glasses, black pants, and suspenders, with a white button-down shirt. When he was done, he turned to look directly at my window, smiled, and waved, then started walking toward the road. I watched him walk off in disbelief. When I couldn't see him anymore from that window, I went to the other window to see where he was going. He had disappeared. There was no sign of him walking down the road, and there was no vehicle that he could have arrived in. There was also no time for him to have gotten into a vehicle and driven off. He was just gone. I haven't seen Joe since then, but my parents still live there today and report that he's still around, making his presence known with his whispering and playful moving of objects. This happened a few months back. I was home alone and just chilling in my room. My dogs often like to lay with me, and this particular day they were doing just that. My parents were at work, Dad in another city, Mom at the school that she worked at. My siblings were at school, so I know for sure no one was home. So I'm just doing my homework and I hear a couple of knocks at my door. My dogs immediately look up and stare silently toward the door. Maybe my brother was just home. I call out his name, and then I open the door when I don't hear anything. Well, you guessed it. There was no one there. Odd. The thing is, if it was a random person who just happened to break into my house, my dogs would have gone berserk. They are weirdly keen at only barking at strangers indoors. Besides, I never hear any footsteps. I double-check the time and notice it's only 10 a.m. Unless my siblings or Mom got sick, there's no way they were coming home at this time. I was later assured that no such thing happened. No one had come home. I've had a couple of odd occurrences in the home, such as things going missing and being replaced in the exact spot that you looked, only hours later. Our house was brand new when we got it and was only built on empty farmland. I used to dabble in the occult as a middle schooler, so maybe that's why. I tried to search floating napkin-like object on Google, but I just kept getting crafting recommendations for Halloween. Something really odd just occurred, and I'd like to share with all of you. Maybe one of you has seen something similar. We live in a nice suburban home built in the late 1960s. We bought it about 3 years ago, and when we first moved in, we'd see a large, brown-colored, shadow-like figure near our stairs. They were never bothersome, but we were stern and said to leave us alone. Our first daughter was born less than a month after we moved in. Sometimes, quite frequently actually, odd things happen, and we just try to think logically about it. I must have left the lights on, even though I think I turned them off. That kind of thing. I'll spare you a recent unsafe thing that happened since it doesn't pertain to what I just witnessed. The other thing happened to my wife and daughter, and again, we seem to have rationalized it. But here's what I saw. I'm lying in my bed and cuddling with my 3-year-old. She had an upset stomach last night after some medication we gave her, and she'd woken up about 30 minutes later than usual. She was tired and wanted to watch YouTube Kids on my phone. My wife went to the restroom and walked out to wash her hands, leaving the light to the bathroom area on while the sink area was unlit. I rolled over to look in that direction, and I saw a napkin-like object floating above the bathroom door. This is the best way I can describe it. It was flat, but probably had the thickness of a napkin. It was square-like, but was floating just above the door. It looked like it was falling down slowly, only to be blown back upwards by the gentlest of breezes. My glasses were on. I could see it plain as day. It was probably white, though that's also the color of the wall. It had a shadowish effect on the wall that it was near. I called out to my wife and said, "What the hell is that?" She came around the corner and turned off the light in the bathroom. I told her to turn the light back on, and it was gone. We've spent the last 30 minutes trying to recreate the situation with lights and activities and positioning. Nothing. I want to think logically about this before saying it was paranormal. For those who have seen the paranormal before, does anything of this shape, texture, movement, or anything else sound familiar? I can't say that I've ever seen a ghost. The 2 experiences tell me I might have been near one. The first one, I was on recruiting duty in New Jersey for the Army. My wife and I lived on Fort Dix. FYI, it was the early 2000s, and while Fort Dix is not an active duty post anymore, the housing area and facilities are still used for personnel that have to work in the area. Or they were. I have no idea of their status now. The thing is, the housing area was supposed to be torn down and new houses built. They had actually torn down a section and they were going to build new houses. Then me and other service members would move from our homes to the new ones, and the houses we left would be torn down and replaced. That didn't happen because this was shortly after 9/11. All of these houses were the same, as you'd expect on a military post. Same layout, same basic stuff. We lived right next to a guy I worked with. Hell, 2 other guys I worked with lived on the same street. We all got along, but as you can imagine, even though I liked these guys, seeing them 12+ hours at work and then after work, on days off, got old fast. Then there was a hurricane that passed through. Fort Dix is relatively close to the coast, so there was a lot of rain. And since the Army has taken money out of maintaining the housing areas so they could build a fence around the entire post, the roof of our house collapsed. I'll spare you the details. Basically, we had to move. The government was at fault, blah, blah, blah. There were 2 houses that were available at the time. Yeah, I could have taken the option to move off post, but recruiting duty was brutal. I was at work all of the time, and my wife was already pissed about that. I was never home, and I only had Sundays off, and sometimes not even that. Plus, I knew it would end, so not looking for a lease off post when all I wanted was to get out of recruiting in New Jersey anyway. One house was available, right next to another guy I worked with. No problem. I liked the guy. He was cool and he wanted out of recruiting duty when his time was up too. The other was a block away. We looked at the first one. An older lady that worked with my wife had told her that she actually lived in the house on the post before her husband passed. She told her that even when they lived there, the house was creepy. It had a bad spirit in it. Me, whatever. Each house was the same. I felt that until we inspected it. My wife is not someone that gives in to superstition easily, but as soon as we entered the place, it felt off. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like nothing was level. Everything in our perception was off, like a fun house. Plus, I seriously had feelings of anger and rage with no provocation when we were in the place. I remember that because it was out of the blue. I was cool when we walked up to the place, but once inside, I instantly hated everyone. I felt like I was 2 seconds from going berserk. My wife also felt uncomfortable in the place. It made her feel angry for no reason. We both decided, nope. We opted to move into the second choice. It was next door to the other guy I said I worked with, but what the fuck. I liked this guy, and his toddler daughter was a sweet kid, so no harm. We never found out why that house made us feel that way, but my wife will not deny that it wasn't us. There was something there. And she's not the person that will believe in ghosts and goblins easily. The lady she worked with wouldn't give details either, and she clearly didn't want to talk about it beyond what she'd already told my wife. I still wonder, what was it? So my friend and I like to drive around at night, talk, get food, listen to music, etc. We're always driving down back roads, mostly in my small town. We usually play tricks on the town perv whenever we see him driving out and about at night too. Tonight, we didn't see him and we decided to go drive around and circle back to the middle of town to see if he came out tonight or not. My friend decided to go down this one back road. It wasn't a road we'd never driven on, considering we'd been down every road in that small town, but it wasn't the normal back road we usually take. I didn't question why she went down this road instead of the other one. I just continued our conversation. As she's driving and I'm talking, we both stop mid-sentence to ask, "Did you just see that?" As a yellow, large, dust-looking glob moves across the street into the trees. Not even into the trees. It was more like overlapping them, if that makes sense. I'm glad she saw it too, because I would have thought I was crazy, as it wouldn't have been the first time I'd seen something and no one else had. It was transparent, dirty yellow, kind of like what your yellow marker looks like once you used it over black or brown pen while coloring. And it looked like a gust of wind blew over a dry pile of dirt. It's 64 degrees out and no wind, and it wasn't from our car, as it was visible in front of us, and then next to our car. My friend and I both think that it might have been a ghost or spirit of some kind, but the fact that it was yellow scares us, because doing further research online, yellow spirits usually mean they're sending a cautious warning. But I just wanted to confirm that. What does a yellow spirit or ghost, dust particles, mean for us? Are we going to be okay? was about 8, my half-brother got married, and he had the wedding in his wife's Welsh hometown. The little hotel we stayed in was terribly haunted. For context, I stayed in a room with my older sister, around 20, and my mother. In the next room, my dad and brother had their space, but they experienced nothing. We did. Here are some creepy things that happened. On the first night, we left to get dinner, and upon coming back, could not open the door. The key we had refused to turn any kind of way, and the door was locked, firm. We rattled and pulled the handle literally every way that it would turn, to no avail. Then a member of staff came around the corner from a smoke break, looked at us strangely, and casually opened the door without any kind of key or struggle. That was fucking weird. Next, the room. The shower was absolutely being messed with. When any of us, except my mother, tried to get in the shower, it would quickly burst up to boiling for my sister and freezing cold for me. And when we jumped out and tested the water, it would stay perfect for ages. It literally did not change until we got in the shower. Then it would immediately rise or fall. I also mentioned feeling watched and scared to my mother after showering. On our last morning, a lot of chaos was happening trying to get packed and ready to go. I woke up having put my DS on charge all night, next to my bed as I always did, and it was gone. Nobody had packed it, and we couldn't find it at all. We were only there for a few nights, so we hadn't bothered to unlock the big wardrobe, since there was hanging space by the beds anyway. But in looking for my DS, I insisted we open it. Now, I'm the tiny height of a child. My mom and sister are both 5'3" at most. DS isn't in there. My dad comes in to look, and he finds the DS switched on low battery, and with the cord wrapped tightly around it, on top of the shelf of the wardrobe. We couldn't even reach, and it was pushed right to the back. As my mom was packing, she had all of her underwear and such in a drawer. She opened it to pack it all up, and it was gone. So she assumed my sister packed it. She had not. Upon opening the drawer again, it was still gone, and everyone saw this. She opened every single drawer in the dresser, and they were all empty. She left it about 10 minutes to look elsewhere, and when she opened it again, everything was back where it was. This last thing is probably the worst, and I'm glad I didn't see this. In the night, I heard taps turning on and stuff, but always assumed it was my sister. I was later told it was not. Thankfully, I slept through this. My mother woke up at random and looked up. My sister, who has long dark hair, was sitting facing away from her at the end of her bed, gazing out the window. Concerned, my mom said, "Are you all right, darling?" In response, my sister, asleep in her bed, murmured back. The girl was still sitting there and didn't move an inch, but disappeared after a while. My mother said it wasn't like she got up and left or faded away. She still can't describe it, but she just disappeared. So yeah, that was scary. The following story was told to me by my grandmother a few years back. She was visiting us a few days ago when I asked her to retell us the story. I don't know if it's true or not, but I believe her, being a person who believes in ghosts, spirits, God, etc. Well, the story goes as follows. It was when my mom was in 6th or 7th grade. The year was 1991, I guess. All of my grandmother's daughters, total of 5 sisters, including my mom, plus her son, were home. My granddad was at work at the time. It was around 9 p.m. at night. All my aunts, including my mom and my uncle, were all huddled in the bedroom with my grandma. Then there was a knock on the door. My grandma, being the brave woman she was, went to answer the knock. Before she opened the door, she asked who it was, and to her shock, someone said, "It's me. Let me in." The only catch was, it was my mom's voice. Nana, what I call my grandma, was shocked to hear it. It was obviously not possible that it would be my mom, as she was sitting inside. Now, after hearing the voice, my Nana knew that something had to be done to protect her kids, so she told everyone to grab a weapon. When everyone was armed with either kitchen knives or long wooden sticks, they went to the door, and my Nana shouted, "Who's there? I know you're not my daughter." There was silence, and then they heard a very, very, very creepy laugh. Way creepier than any horror movie. They waited a few minutes. Then my mom, being the oldest, got fed up and opened the door. There was no one there, just a piece of thread that was worn on the feet. The thread was not there before, my Nana told me, and the front gate was locked. Everyone was spooked out and they went to bed. Nothing has happened since. My mom doesn't remember anything, but I guess that's a given since it's been 31 years since the incident. When I was 15, my uncle asked if I could help him clean the church that he went to. Saying yes, I went with him on a Saturday morning. Before entering the church, he told me that it was haunted. I thought that he was just trying to see if he could scare me. He told me to take off my shoes before entering. We entered through the kitchen door. Walking into the church, we stopped under the balcony. He then knocked on the wall 3 times. That was when I heard what sounded like someone jumping down from a high place above us. Then I heard 5 or 6 steps that stopped at the edge of the balcony. For about 10 seconds, I didn't hear anything. Then I heard what sounded like boots scuffing on the floor, like someone was turning around. And then I heard the same 5 or 6 steps going back in the direction of which they came. Thinking that my uncle was still trying to scare me, I ran up the stairs and searched all the rooms. There was no one there. This was back in 2015. I think the beginning of spring. It was my first job as a truck driver. I'd just gotten my CDL that January. But I was headed west on I-40 in North Carolina. I can't remember where I was headed exactly, but it was about 2 or 3 a.m., and there wasn't a car or truck anywhere on the road, which was a little odd. You always have some sort of truck traveling like I was because of team trucks with 2 drivers. But I was tired, which could be why what happened. I was still awake, though, as I'd just downed a 5-hour energy and a mean bean monster. When I get to the exit to Mabin, which is only a Petro truck stop, but this one's like a small town inside, I approach the exit, not slowing to a stop, and I see what looks like a woman walking from the oncoming side to the exit. But she was moving way too fast, and I was too close to stop for her. There was no way I could move to avoid her, and it looked like I ran over top of her. I stopped the truck, slinging my teammate from the bunk to the floor, him cussing. I'm jumping out in the middle of the interstate, thinking I just killed a woman. I walk to the front of the truck. Nothing. No blood. Not even a dent. So I walk all the way around 3 times, and I look under the truck, but nothing. I don't know if I was seeing things because I was tired or if it was a ghost, but I know I can tell you what she was wearing. It looked like a white t-shirt with jeans. I don't remember seeing her shoes. Needless to say, I was awake the rest of the night. I grew up in the country. We had lots of strange, bizarre things happen to us during that time. Aliens, paranormal, etc. I lived in a house surrounded by fields and forests, no cable or internet. Not that those were really a big thing back then anyway. So I spent most of my time outdoors. This happened when I was in my early teens. My best friend and I were driving to go bring some food to my dad and his friend, who were working late at night on some scrap metal down the way from us. To get to where they were, there were 2 ways to go. One was the normal paved road, and the second was a long old dirt road that people didn't really go down. The dirt road was surrounded by trees on both sides, had some sketchy, older abandoned houses on either side, and a very old cemetery at the end. After we brought the food to them, we decided to take the old dirt road back as a joke. We used to walk that road every now and then during the day, even though it creeped us out. But we tried to stay away from it at night. We were both laughing about how the other one was too scared to go down it. She was driving, and we were both laughing, listening to music, when we made the turn onto the road. It was a right-hand turn, so in order to make the full turn, she had to sweep her headlights across the cemetery. I remember looking at the graves, and that's when I saw her. It was an all-white figure in the shape of a female, with a long dress and long hair. She was standing between the cemetery and the forest. I stared at her for what I felt was 5 to 10 seconds before she vanished, and then I continued to stare at that spot for a good 10 seconds longer. Once I kind of came out of it, I realized that the car was stopped. I have no idea for how long. My friend and I were both very quiet, and we both kind of looked at each other like, what the hell? Neither one of us really said anything for a while, but I finally asked her if she had seen something, and she said she did. Not wanting to say what I saw first, I asked her what she saw, and she described the figure exactly as I had above. Interestingly, none of us were afraid. I remember when I saw her, everything kind of went into slow motion. Even when there was music going on in the car, it was quiet, and I definitely don't remember the car slowing down and stopping. I remember being in awe and thinking she radiated beauty, and she still crosses my mind to this day. I've been back there many times during the night and day, and I haven't seen anything like it since. Anyways, thanks for reading if you're still with me. It's nice to be able to share these stories in a serious way without people looking at you like you've lost your mind. So I've decided to share a couple of experiences from when I was living with my grandparents in the 90s. Their house wasn't very big, just a small 2-bedroom rambler, shaped a lot like a mobile home, very rectangular. To get it out of the way, I was living with my grandparents because my parents were not equipped to be parents, basically. 3 years in, my mom would overdose, and my dad would be incarcerated. But before and after that, Grandma and Grandpa's house for me. The first experience was small enough, and no one was around to vouch for me, so I'm on my own with this one. I was in first grade. When it happened, I was in the bathroom, brushing my teeth. At that age, or that height rather, I couldn't quite see the mirror without stepping on this little stool. I went to grab the stool to stand on, and there was like this resistance to it, like it was stuck or someone was pulling on it. I confirmed with my eyeballs. The stool was stuck on nothing. There is nothing. Yet, as I tugged and tugged, it wouldn't budge. And then suddenly, it gave way, sending me backwards into the outside of the tub. Sitting there, shocked, I watched as the stool went from laying on its side to slowly picking itself back up. I ran out of that bathroom so fast, telling my grandma and grandpa what happened. They laughed, not in a mean way, but in a way that was wrapped with words like, "Aw, honey, so sorry that happened to you." Except I wanted to know what exactly had just happened to me. The next incident wouldn't take place for another year, when I was 8. I remember we were moving swiftly. We had a strictly enforced bedtime of 10 p.m. at Grandma and Grandpa's, and we really wanted to watch a movie. At some point, my cousin stopped moving around and I told him to hurry up so we could go watch the movie. But instead of responding, he just points towards the bathroom toilet, which is on the left side of the tub. I turn and I look over. The toilet paper roll, it's moving on its own. Not just unraveling on its own. No, it's unraveling upwards, as though someone is actually pulling on the toilet paper. We both stare at this for probably only a few seconds before we hear the crashing sound of something in the bathtub. We jump and we turn to see that everything has fallen off the shelves, and I mean everything. Just as we hear my grandma in the hallway shouting, "What are you boys doing in there?" The sink turns on, water coming out of the spout at full capacity. As my grandma walks in, she sees what looks like a mess. My cousin and I, we run out. We go towards our grandpa, with our grandma following behind. Once we told them and promised we didn't make the mess, it was still a similar reaction to the first experience. They exchanged looks, they laughed, and reassured us it was the wind, maybe air from the furnace. Well, they didn't see what we saw. After that incident, I never really had any other concrete, strange experiences, not in that house. Though I've never really let go of the feeling that it was definitely haunted. Both of my grandparents are gone now, so there's no way to ask, but part of me feels like maybe they knew all along that their house was haunted, and they just didn't want to scare us kids. During my time at university, I had a part-time job at a huge Bavarian company. The building had 8 floors in a quadratic shape, with a big lobby in the center of the building. It actually was hundreds of years old, but completely renovated. I worked once or twice a week, mainly on weekends. Now here's the interesting part. I worked the night shifts, and my job was basically to walk around the whole building twice a night. While walking the hallways, I just had to watch for stuff that people forgot when they'd rush into the weekend. Open doors, open windows, or light switches still turned on. Nothing out of the ordinary. The payment was also good. In fact, I was kind of surprised about how good the payment was, because obviously I didn't have to do much in those 8 hours. My girlfriend and other friends mentioned that the payment is just fair, as I had to walk around a huge building at night, completely alone. They always mentioned how they would never do this, as the sinister feeling in the buildings like these play mind games with them. I never had problems with being alone. I was neither paranoid or believed in paranormal occurrences. Just studied throughout the night and did my 2 walks. Until this one night in September of 2018. The shift started like any other. I got the keys from the janitor and started studying after my first walkthrough of the building. Between 3:55 a.m. and 4:05 a.m., the whole electric system throughout the building resets, which I found really odd at my first shift, but I grew to ignore it after some months. The janitor explained the reason after I'd asked. The reset leads to light sources turning on and off throughout the whole building, systematically, but still chaotic. I sat at the front desk, not even paying attention to it, when suddenly a certain noise reached me. One of the 2 elevator doors in the first floor opened itself, closed itself, and opened itself again. Malfunction, I thought, going back to reading boring scientific papers. About 20 minutes later, it happened again, but this time, the light in the elevator switched off, which seemed really off. At this point, I started to feel a little bit alarmed. When I moved into the elevator, the door behind me closed. I panicked and tried to get out of the elevator, but the elevator already started to take me to the 2nd floor, in complete darkness. When I reached the 2nd floor, the door opened and I basically fell out of the elevator door, turning around while I fell. The really sinister-looking, completely dark elevator closed again and took off to another floor. My heart was racing, and a part of me thought that someone manipulated the console, but another part of me felt something else. Fear. I had goosebumps all over my body and returned to the front desk, with the plan to text my supervisor and the janitor about the technical defect of the elevator. I did this with trembling hands when I suddenly heard another distant noise. Radio music from somewhere in the canteen. I slowly moved to the canteen with my smartphone light switched on. The noise came from the kitchen, and I followed it. Reaching the kitchen, I saw that a radio was playing music on one of the tables. The cooks listen to this while they're working. I froze and couldn't breathe. During my first walk, the janitor texted me, told me to put the radio under a certain desk and switch it off, as the cooks would always store it there. I did this directly when I started the shift, even texting him, because I couldn't find the desk at first, after unplugging the radio. I turned around and I sprinted through the canteen, directly to an exit, and I waited outside for the last 2 hours. Luckily, I had the keys with me when someone for the day shift came. When he arrived, I went into the building with him, took my bag, and left quickly. I called in sick for the next 2 weeks. After that, I quit the job, using excuses regarding my sleep cycle. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. Most people here are probably aware of the story of Ed Gain. For those that aren't, he was a small-town handyman who confessed to murdering 2 women, in addition to stealing numerous bodies from their graves. One of the women that he murdered was the owner of the local hardware store, where he shot and killed her. That building still stands today. My story happened 20-plus years ago. I live in that same town, and it was just before Thanksgiving. I had already started decorating my place for Christmas, and I needed to replace some of the lights. So I just made a quick trip to the hardware store for a couple of boxes. I knew the building was rumored to be haunted by the murdered woman, but I never put much stock in it. I was in the back area where they kept the Christmas decorations and was about to grab the lights when I heard someone nearby saying something about antifreeze. I turned my head and I saw a woman walking by with a massive gunshot in her head. She then suddenly disappeared. I just stood there in shock for a good minute. When I finally made my way to the front of the store to pay for the lights, the guy behind the counter took one look at my face and simply said, "You saw her, didn't you?" When I was in high school, my mother was married to a man named Donald. Now, Donald was a drunk. He worked a good job and made good money, so he provided for us well enough. But he filled his free time chugging vodka like water in his underwear on the couch. Donald wasn't always aggressive when he drank. However, after a hard day at work, he would come home, drink a bottle, and try to pick fights with me for anything that he could think of. Very often these fights would turn physical, and while I was no lightweight in high school, on the first occasion I fought back, he called the cops on me. As a result of this situation, once he was about 3/4 of the way through a bottle, my mother took to packing an overnight bag, having me load up, and going to stay in a hotel for the night. I always stayed in the same hotel, just down the street from my house. It would allow me to go back home before school the next morning, after Donald had left for work, to get ready. It was a nice place, with a huge open foyer that all of the rooms surrounded, going up 5 stories. I knew the ladies at the desk really well, as I was there 5 or 6 times a month. On the occasion in question, I'd gone over fairly late in the evening. The hotel had 24-hour booking at the front desk, but the girl behind the desk mentioned that they were booked up for the night. I breathed an exasperated sigh as I was relayed the news, and mentioned I would just catch a bus a little ways uptown to go to another hotel. The girl behind the desk mentioned that there was one room she could put me in, at a discounted rate no less. She was, however, hesitant to do so. The owner of the hotel had taken it out of service for reasons unknown to her, but that she knew I'd be gone before the owner would arrive in the morning. She could fudge the system to make it look like the room hadn't been occupied. I thanked her for this and accepted, not caring for the other options I had available to me at the time. So I got the key and went into the room, got undressed, showered, and settled into bed. I noted that despite her reservations, the room was immaculate. I simply couldn't fathom why a perfectly good room wasn't being rented out, but decided not to look a gift horse in the mouth. The room was pretty standard as far as hotel rooms go. A single queen-size bed, a TV on the wall to the left, a desk to the right, a mirrored closet across from the bed with a table next to it, and a ceiling fan just past the foot of the bed. I fell asleep sometime around 11 to the sound of the TV playing some late-night cop drama, quite comfortable in the bed. Until around 2:30. I wasn't awoken by a sound as much as a lack of sound. You never realize how jarring silence is until it occurs suddenly in the night. As I rolled to sit up, I took note of the time on the clock, and I noticed that the TV had turned off. The room was illuminated by the light of the parking lot, pouring in through the blinds. As my vision sharpened, and the room properly came into focus, I noticed that I was not alone. At the foot of the bed was a woman, She was wearing a hotel bathrobe. Her hair was darkened by water, as if she'd just gotten out of the shower. And notably, she was quite tall. The top of her head just 2 feet or below the ceiling fan. She just stood there at the foot of the bed, with her head cocked to one side, and stared at me. She didn't say anything. She didn't move. At some point during this exchange, I had convinced myself I was dreaming, that there was no woman in my room. So despite her standing there and staring at me, I wasn't afraid. I had been having hyper-realistic dreams since I was a kid, after all. So I simply laid back down on my back and watched her stand there, my head tilted so I could keep an eye on her, knowing that if I waited, she would simply disappear. And she did. I fell back asleep and slept through to the morning wake-up call. The lady at the front desk sounded a bit nervous when she called, so I quickly got dressed and headed out to the front desk, thinking that her boss may have come in sooner than expected. I wasn't expecting the conversation I had at the front desk as I checked out. When I walked up, she started apologizing to me. I was confused, so I calmed her down and asked her to explain what had her so stressed. She took a breath and said, "I found out why that room was taken out of service." Come to find out, 2 weeks before I stayed in that room, a woman stayed there while on vacation with her husband and 2 kids. She stayed behind while they went to grab breakfast one morning. She took a shower, she put on a bathrobe, and hung herself from the ceiling fan with a bedsheet. Her husband found her when they got back. The room was removed from service as a matter of good taste until the services were held. I didn't know any of this beforehand, and it makes me wonder, did I see her in my room that night? Or was it really just a dream? We were driving home, my mother in the driver's seat, heading back after spending an eventful day in another much larger town. I wouldn't call it a city, nor would I call it a town. Well, not in my book, at least. We were traveling through the countryside, seeing paddocks and paddocks with the occasional tree here and there. As we got about halfway, my mother asked if it was okay if we took a detour to go see her then boyfriend's place. Seeing the time was about 2 in the afternoon, and I wasn't in any rush to go back home, I told her it was fine, and we turned off the main road. We continued to travel on our new path, the road being a singular paved road. It was one of those that was probably enough room for 2 cars to drive past with no real issue. Anything bigger, on the other hand, than someone was driving on the curb. So we continued talking nonsense, listening to the radio. I looked forward. There in the distance was a man traveling in the same direction we were. Not really out of the ordinary, as there was one of those blink-if-you-miss-it towns nearby. But something about him just grabbed my attention. For starters, he was a farmer. If his attire wasn't the biggest giveaway, but his clothes. He wore a wide rim hat, a shirt, overalls, and boots like something from the 60s or 70s. As we got closer and closer, he seemed to be not noticing us coming up behind him. My mother's car was not quiet. Closer and closer. My eyes fixed on him as we got close, drove by, and he vanishes. My eyes were completely fixed on him. He was there, and then nothing. I quickly looked back, trying to see if he fell or was hiding. No one was there. No place for him to hide. Just an empty road. You saw him too? My mother asks. The farmer, I respond. Yeah. I turn back to her, and she too was shocked. I described what he looked like, and my mother confirmed it. She too saw this guy. I've been on that road many times in the past. Having lived in that area, I know every turn, every curve, every hill. But only that one time have I seen him on that road. I do believe what I saw was a ghost, still reliving his walk back home. Maybe he died on that road or got hit. I don't know, but I'll never forget it. Back in 2014, when I was a teenager, I was still living in my small town in Europe, Bulgaria. Me and my childhood friends, 2 boys and 1 girl, would sometimes take walks along a highway, one which wasn't used very frequently. Most of the time, we would see a few trucks pass by, but it wasn't full of traffic, and it was very close to where I lived, so it was just something we'd often do. On the left side of it, there were houses. On the right side, there was a huge empty field with some hills here and there, but most of the land was empty, full of grass. On the right side where the field was, there was an old abandoned canal, which hadn't been used since the early 90s. It was full of trash and sticks, and it was also used to dispose of bones of farm animals such as goats and sheep. There weren't so many, and yeah, it's creepy, but we knew they were from animals. We visited before in the daytime. Nothing impressive, really. Just an empty hole. One ordinary night, we decided to go on another walk along the highway. We went to the end once and then came back. We got bored since we were always doing the same thing. Someone had the idea to go along the small dirt road, which is alongside the abandoned canal, and we did, without giving it much thought. Now, have in mind that on the highway, there are streetlights, but on the small dirt road alongside this canal, there's no light coming from anywhere. It was a full moon as far as I remember, since it wasn't pitch black, and we could see where we were going without using our phones. Anyways, we were walking, joking, laughing, just having a really good time. One of the boys went ahead of us, since he was walking faster. Me and the other boy and the other girl were behind him, walking a bit slower. At the middle of the dirt road, the 3 of us decide to go back to the well-lit area on the highway. And we called to the other guy to come back as well. A few minutes passed and the boy was ahead. He was almost at the end of the dirt road when he started running towards us, screaming, "You guys, run!" So instinctively, we all turned around to see what's going on, and we just froze. We saw him running very fast towards us, and there was something behind him, following him. Everyone managed to brush it off and run toward the highway, except for me. I stood there for a few more seconds, trying to figure out what we were witnessing. It's very hard to describe. It was a figure that somehow was shining bright, white light, moving up and down, coming towards us. When I realized I couldn't figure out what I was seeing, I turned my back towards it, and I ran so fast that I passed the others, even though they had started running before me. We didn't stop until we reached the street lights, and when we did, we turned around. There was nothing behind us anymore. We were terrified at first, but then we just dropped the subject and never spoke of it again. None of us shared this with anybody outside of our childhood group, since we thought people would start rumors that we're taking drugs, etc. It was a very small town. A couple of years went by. We grew up and everyone started moving out to the bigger cities in the area. So at one point, I was the only person from our childhood group left in our hometown, since I was the youngest of us 4. In 2017, I was hanging outside in my hometown with some friends, a completely different group of people who were never friends with my old group of friends. We started talking about random stuff, and then it got dark outside, and one of the guys suggested that we should share spooky stories. Then he started talking, and he shared how recently he and 3 other boys were hanging out during the night alongside the dirt road next to the abandoned canal. At this point, I was all ears. He then proceeded to describe how exactly the same thing happened to them, how they were just hanging out there, and then some weird figure, a shining, bright white thing, came towards them. They got scared and ran away, and then when they looked back, the figure had disappeared. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My jaw dropped to the ground. Then I shared that a couple of years back, me and 3 other friends experienced the exact same thing, in the very same place. I asked him if these other people had talked to him about it, and if this was some kind of joke, but it wasn't. The story doesn't exactly end here. I went home that night, still stunned, and I barely slept. I kept remembering what happened years ago, and I was trying to figure things out, but I thought of nothing that made sense. What we experienced was just unexplainable. So the next day, I decided to share everything with my parents, and I honestly thought that they might just brush it off, say that we were just too scared and imagined something. But to my surprise, they were both just staring at me, horrified. I asked them why they weren't saying anything, and why they were just staring at me. Then they told me how, back in the early 90s, when they were teenagers themselves, 2 kids went missing. A 7-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy. Before they went missing, these kids lived right next door to our apartment, in the house that was facing our balcony. Since it's a small town, everyone thought that the kids would be found soon. But 5 years passed by, and there was no sign of them. Nobody had heard anything. There were no suspects in the kidnapping or any leads as to what happened to them. Then, in the 5th year of their disappearance, their remains were found in the abandoned canal, and by the evidence found there, it was concluded that they had been murdered, but the killer was never found. My parents said this event really shook the community back then, and a lot of people avoided going near the canal since it happened. But curious teens were occasionally visiting it and sharing stories of how they'd seen something unexplainable. However, nobody believed them. To this day, when I visit my hometown and pass by the canal, I feel so uneasy. And I don't even think about going alongside the dirt road, not after knowing what really happened there. So, nothing too crazy, but I do have a little story about my childhood home. It was the summer of 2012. Life was good, and I was up at 2 a.m. watching Teen Nick in my house's den. The whole house was always fascinating to me. One of the first houses built in our small town in Kansas during the Prohibition as a moonshiner's illegal party house. The whole house is a colonial style full of Victorian features. From the outside, it looks like a 2-story, but there are actually 3 floors and half a basement. The architecture was always confusing as to how this was accomplished, but wedged between the top and main floor is a log cabin-themed room, our family room or den. It was a glorified bar room fitted with a monstrous fireplace, an Alaskan moose head from circa 1920, and a salvaged chandelier from the former Douglas Opera House. I hated being alone in that room at night. I always got a weird sensation like someone standing over me when I'd try to sleep on the couch after a long night of TV. My best friend and I also felt this from time to time, sleeping in my own bed, which used to be in the master suite. Never could get the cat or dog to hang out in the den, though. Its door was an inch thick of solid wood and had a very complex lock that remained tucked inside its latch. No previous owner had the key. We never bothered to close it. It would get stuck in the frame because it was so heavy, designed to keep the police out if someone tipped off a booze party. There was a nursery on the top floor that shared a wall with this room. It was sold to us with no doorknob to the small 4x10 room. It became our home office. There was a brand new computer and an all-in-one printer fax that remained unplugged and rarely used. My bedroom was right next to it, and I always slept with my door open. In the middle of the night, I could often see the computer light up and paper would cycle through the printer. Could never get myself to check it until the morning. When we looked at the sheets, there was nothing on them, and we'd just load them back inside. It was my sister and I's favorite place to pirate scary movies. We would close the door as to not disturb Mom and Dad because it didn't latch. But one night, she left me in the room to go get a snack, and when she came back, she couldn't open the door. I was trapped inside. My mom had to use a butter knife to force the handle. I was shook, given the timing. But back to the den. I'm minding my teen Nick business when, out of the blue, I get a call from my friend. She tells me that she's using a Ouija board, which I've always done my part to stay far from. She says that her presence told her to call me. She informed me that I was wearing a black shirt, which I was, and I only own one. I hung up the call and immediately went to my bedroom to wait out the next few hours to daylight. That same summer, my mom, grandma, sister, and I went on one of our late-night drives where we'd blast oldies while cruising the back roads. As we were driving, an unidentifiable creature ran in front of our car and across the road. None of us agreed on what we saw. We thought it was a very large white rabbit, cat, or small dog. It was moving unthinkably fast for any of those animals. It made it across the road in 2 hops. All the time we joked about it and kept on our way. When we got home and stepped into the foyer, heavy work boots start down the upstairs hall and then down the stairs. They stop at the den level. From the foyer, you can see the part of the staircase that leads to the den. No one is there. We're all looking at each other, waiting for my father to continue his trip down the stairs. He then comes up from the basement, followed by our dog. The cat is chilling in the window on the main floor. We sent my dad upstairs to investigate. He checked everywhere, even the attic. Nothing. It could all be coincidence. When we moved into an apartment that fall, nothing else strange seemed to happen. I am tempted to ask the family who lives there now if they've ever experienced anything. The original owners are buried in the morgue just down the street. I live in Singapore, and it's the Hungry Ghost Month again. It's like the Day of the Dead in Mexico, but with more jaw sticks and hell money. However, after my experience 5 years ago, I never leave my blinds open at night anymore. To those unaware, the Hungry Ghost Festival happens during the 7th month of the lunar calendar and lasts for 14 days in East Asian countries. Essentially, Taoist and Buddhist followers burn paper money or hell money, jaw sticks, and food offerings to pray to their ancestors. These offerings also appease the hungry ghosts, spirits with insatiable hunger that haunt the streets. As Singapore is a multiracial, multi-religious society, locals are taught about the festival as children. There are 3 simple rules. Don't step on any joss sticks or paper money. Never touch the offerings. And don't go out late at night. Naturally, I abide by the rules and have a front row seat to the festival. I understand its religious importance and honestly don't hate it. Every year, offerings are left along pathways near homes, and paper money is burned in metal bins late at night. Yellow embers light the ground, with smoke trailing up to meet my window. I live in an apartment close to the ground floor, and I'm within earshot of the chants and the prayers. One late night, I couldn't sleep too well, and hung out with my elder sister and her cat in the living room. The night was deathly quiet and peaceful. At some point, I realized I could smell smoke in the living room and figured the window must have been left ajar. From this room, the window looks down on the offerings on the ground floor. The curtain was slightly open. I snuck over to the window and peeped outside. It was midnight. The metal bin was still burning, and it gave the ground floor an unearthly glow. As I closed the window, I heard something crunching below me. I figured it was the neighborhood cat, but I was met with something large, crouching under my window. From my vantage point, I could see someone kneeling at the offerings. They had long black hair and a draping, white, dirty smock. They bowed over a spot with many offerings, and I thought they were in deep prayer, but it was odd because it was pretty late already. The crunching noises were growing louder, originating from the messy black hair. My realization made my knuckles turn white. I was rooted in fear. This wasn't a person. They had no shadow in the light of the joss sticks and were actively eating the offerings, hungrily, as if they were starved for years. My elder sister saw me petrified and called out to me, whispering if I was okay. I looked at her, my words shivering as I breathed. Someone is eating the offerings. The moment my voice rang out, something felt wrong. The crunching had stopped. I looked back to see the figure standing straight, stiff as a board. As it turned around, I locked the window and shut the curtains. I huddled beside my sister. She sensed something was off too. All was quiet until the growling started. We looked over to the front door to see our pet cat growling. Protective of my elder sister, her furry coat and tail puffed up, and she looked unbelievably angry. My sister and I didn't move for an hour as the front door shook outside. I could hear a woman laughing softly at the door. I know I fucked up, but I'd never told the rest of my family about the incident. If my cat wasn't at the door, I believe that thing could have attacked me. As my cat no longer lives with us, I became very diligent and made sure every goddamn window is covered and locked by sundown. Okay, so a couple of months ago, middle of the night, our house alarm starts wailing. And then it made a sound I've never heard it make before. Almost like a record scratched to a stop. I'm up in a flash and our little security monitor says our front door is open. The alarm is still active on the screen, but there's no sound being emitted through the house. I live in a small house. The security panel's in my room, and the front door is located in the living room, right outside of it. I grab my pistol and I slowly lean my head out my bedroom doorway. The front door is indeed wide open, but my 3-year-old daughter is also standing on the porch in her blue Paw Patrol pajamas. I'm bewildered at what I'm seeing. I set the pistol down and I dash to get her inside. There's no way she's able to reach, let alone unlock 2 deadbolts, one being a slide chain. I knew this, and as I put her back to bed, I still pondered the idea of how did she manage to do that, rather than simply, how did this happen? I thought she was sleepwalking at first, because why else would she be walking around at this time? But she was wide awake. She told me she was playing. When I asked, how did she get outside? She says, door was open. I wanted to believe somehow, some way, she was able to accomplish this feat. I really did. So I ignored it. Now, last night at 2 o'clock in the morning, I walked into the living room and I saw my daughter playing peekaboo in the dark, by herself, just sitting there, laughing and doing the motions, saying peekaboo on the floor. I don't know how long she was out there. The only reason I woke up is because of how loud she was squealing with laughter. Call it mother's instincts, but once that specific tone and pitch of your child's voice hits your ears, you're instantly up and alert. When I get to the living room, I flip on the lights and I pick her up. First time I've ever felt weird in my house. I viewed the front door thing as a problem I could eventually solve, but this was just eerie. When I put her back to bed last night, she was instantly back to sleep. This has creeped me out so much that I'm reaching out for help. Any provided theories are welcome as to what the hell is actually happening and what I should do. Help ease my nerves, because all my theories are ending with me getting the house blessed or giving my daughter up for adoption if she keeps doing this, interacting with something I can't see stuff. It's so creepy. Yesterday, I was in the bathtub at my boyfriend's house. Usually, I'll listen to a podcast or music, but last night, I just wanted to sit in silence. At some point, my boyfriend walks in with a peaceful look on his face. He asks, "You singing, honey?" I sing a lot in the shower and around the house, but I definitely was not singing. I told him this, and we both got creeped out. I asked if any of the windows were open, like maybe someone was singing outside. All the windows were shut, and the loud AC units were running. Also, it was really late, so the idea of someone singing out in the night was eerie in itself. He said the singing he heard was so clear that he could still remember the melody. He hummed it and asked me again, "You sure you weren't singing that? Maybe quietly?" The melody was not one that I recognized, and no, I definitely was not singing. What do you guys think? Ghost? A little bit of background. I grew up in a little village just outside of Cambridge, UK. My family house is not that old, mid-60s, and built on old water meadows. The house itself is a bungalow, so all of the rooms are on one floor. The living rooms, lounge, kitchen, etc., to one side. and bedrooms and bathrooms to the other. The house is next door to the local church, which is a very old foundation of Saxon. The main building of the church was built during the 13th and 15th century. On to what I've experienced in my family house. I would say most of my experiences that I remember were from 15 to 19, when I left for university. I'll highlight some of the more memorable ones, but it was pretty consistent. Things such as doors opening, hearing your name in the breeze. Even now, there seems to be at times a breeze through the house, even if all of the doors and windows are shut. One of the most memorable moments, I had just moved bedrooms, from the one that I shared with my brother to the smaller bedroom my sister had just vacated. I was quite happy, as I was 15 and actually had my own room and my own TV. It was 94, and it meant that I didn't have to watch songs of praise. The room itself was 13 square feet, I think, with one window overlooking the back garden. My sister had always said, in that room, she'd be woken up in the middle of the night by someone banging really hard on the external wall. I ignored it. Being the younger brother, I thought she was just going over the top. Though we always felt someone looking at us from the dark of the garden at night. I get myself settled in the room. A week or two passes and nothing happens. It's late August. It's warm. I have the window open. I wake up, and I think it's about 3 a.m. The house is quiet and dark. I hear the sound of something hitting a rock or ice, a chipping noise from the garden. I'm very awake by this point. This goes on for a while. I thought I heard some talking, faintly. Next moment, bang, bang, bang. Right on the wall behind my head, the external wall. Felt like someone wanted to smash in. Panicked, hammering of the wall. This happened for a minute. Could have been longer, felt like an eternity. Then silence. Nothing. Could not explain it. Heart pounding. I couldn't sleep that night, or the other times it happened. It happened about a dozen times, but it was not the most vivid thing that happened in that room. I think the most vivid thing that happened, only once from what I remember, was when I was about 17. I had gotten into the habit of leaving the radio playing in the background while I slept. I still sleep better with background noise. I woke up in the middle of the night. The house was quiet, apart from the radio playing Hyper Ballad by Bjork. And I felt a massive weight on my chest. I could only move my arms. I slowly moved them towards my chest to see if I can remove the invisible weight. Inch by inch, my arms seemed to struggle. At the time, I was playing rugby a lot. I was fit and strong. It shouldn't have been that hard. When I managed to get my arms together, the weight disappeared suddenly. I then look at the door. It opens a crack, and I can picture it now. A lady's hand slowly comes in. Very strange. It's pale, almost translucent. I can see the end of what she's wearing. It's an embroidered lace with flowers, Victorian looking. As bizarre as it sounds, they reach for the light switch. It's a dimmer, so it just turns it slightly and moves away again. Nothing else. Just saying it was there. Don't sleep much that night either. I live in an apartment that has an obvious ghost or spirit living here too. While living here, I've had 2 roommates. All 3 of us have witnessed the exact same thing from this specific spirit. When we were the only ones home, and would take a shower, it would sound like the front door would open, like someone was coming home. We would get out of the shower expecting someone to be home. Every time this happened, we opened the bathroom door to find out that, in fact, no one came through the front door. I live alone currently, and I took a shower this evening. The noise and feeling this time was a little different. In the evening, I push a 50-pound piece of furniture up against the door to prevent intruders. This specific evening, I heard a bang at the door, and while it sounded like there was a struggle to get in, after hearing that noise, it sounded like a door halfway with a creaking noise. It didn't frighten me. It actually hasn't really frightened anyone, just confused because we know what we heard. Does anyone have any idea of why the spirit is doing this when someone is home alone and in the shower? I heard once that spirits were attracted to water. Is this true? And why not in the shower with a roommate home? Well, looking forward to your insight. I work at a haunted house, and it turns out it's actually haunted. I work at a haunted house in Utah. I'm a makeup artist, and it's called Haunted Hollow. I've worked there for 7 years now. Haunted Hollow is all outdoors in a forest that runs along a river. The costume and makeup room is indoors, upstairs in one of the only buildings on the property. I was upstairs in the makeup room, cleaning up after getting all the cast ready and sending them out. I was alone in this room, and I suddenly felt my butt cheek burn, like burn. It was a whole 30 degrees, so the sudden burning had me kind of freaked out. I had not touched anything because I was standing in the middle of the room. A few moments had gone by, and my girlfriend came into the room, and I asked her to look at it, thinking I'd been bitten by a spider or something. My girlfriend said that I had a burn on my butt cheek, running down the back of my leg. It even had welts. That same night, my little sister, who's an actor at the haunt, came home with 3 scratches on her arm, and they stayed on her arm for a week before fading. My grandmother would always tell me about knocking that she would hear either a few days before or moments before someone close to her would pass away. It would be around 3 knocks in no particular place. She said she would sometimes hear it at the door, behind the wall, or coming from outside. My grandmother had always kind of had this weird gift to see and experience things that I guess were paranormal, for lack of a better word. She would always tell me her experiences. Me, not being the bravest person on earth, would get so scared I wouldn't be able to sleep well for days. I always thought the knocks were interesting whenever she told me about it, because not long after it usually happened. Someone would die. Or she would complain for days that she wasn't sleeping, and then the 3 knocks would happen as well as other weird things. So I was open to the idea of these knocks due to the fact that, evidently, people sometimes passed away. Last year, the 3 knocks happened to me. It was a Friday morning, and that entire week, my grandmother's sister, Suri, had been fighting COVID in the hospital. Suri was the second closest thing to a grandmother for me, so I had a great love for her. I wouldn't say we were close, but there was that grandmotherly love that she always had given me. When I woke up, I was still between that state of being very sleepy, but also fully aware of my surroundings as I wasn't asleep. I know I had my back to the door of my room when I heard 3 faint but audible knocks on my door. I opened my mouth to say, "Yes?" Then it hit me like a train that I'd heard absolutely no one walk to the door or open any of the doors we had in the hallway. And trust me when I say I have the loudest family. So, I should have heard someone or something. My body froze and a chill went right down my back. For a good minute, I was too terrified to move. I laid in bed for a while to listen if anyone would maybe walk away or open the door to confirm if it was indeed one of my family members. But no, nothing but silence after that. I even thought my brother was trying to scare me. Anyways, long story short, exactly, and I kid you not, exactly 3 days later, after I heard those 3 knocks, my grandmother's sister Suri passed away that morning. The whole experience freaked me out. I still struggle to comprehend what happened, but it did. There's probably a logical explanation, but the fact that she died a while after really scared me and made me think about what my grandmother always told me. I thought you may all enjoy the many stories of what I would think to be a paranormal hotspot, Spirit Lake, Idaho. Spirit Lake is a small town north of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, with many haunted houses and much talk of ghosts. Before I get into the deep digs of the paranormal activity in the area, I would like to put a little background content out there on the town, and I want to fully disclose that all this information I'm providing is word of mouth, except for how the lake was named. Before it was even settled, the Kootenai tribe resided in the area. The tribes in this area were constantly at war with each other. To make peace, the chief promised his princess daughter to marry the prince son of the enemy tribe. But the princess was already madly in love with a warrior. Completely distraught, the couple went to the lake and jumped in, drowning and haunting the lake forever. Legend has it that you will see the two in a canoe with mist around it. The tribe named the lake something that translates into English as Spirit Lake. On top of this eerie tale, there are many deaths and memorials around the lake. It's exceptionally weird because I've been to many lakes in North Idaho, being an avid fisher, and none have nearly as many memorials or graves as this. I only confidently know 3 stories of deaths in the lake. One was a 7-year-old boy swimming in shallow water, got tangled in weeds and drowned. I always wondered about why weeds that could easily be pulled up drowned him. The lake bottom is very muddy and stuff like that just doesn't root well in there. Maybe he just panicked and couldn't pull up. Or maybe something held him down there. Another was at your classic backwoods trespassing high school bonfire party. A junior was drunk, and no one noticed him falling into the water. How did he not make a sound? Sound echoes in a lot of the area that he was in. There wasn't any loud music because they didn't want to get caught. Did someone jokingly push him in and thought that he was well enough to get out on his own? Did he slowly fall in and no one noticed? Or did something pull him in? The final story I know is a drug deal gone wrong. 2 teenagers were fighting over pot money. It was winter, and the other got violent and pushed him in. The water is very shallow and iced over, but he got trapped under the ice. Most of the memorials are male teens. The negative energy is added to by the negative witches that lived in Spirit Lake. They were known for animal sacrifices and sexual rituals. Many of them in the 60s would stop people on the highway at night and try to convert you. They're still there to this day. I lived 2 houses down, and I'd wake up to chants in no correlation to the moon cycles. The women in the family, they were not allowed to get out. The father and uncle were pervs. They dressed in old-fashioned farmer clothes, browns, grays, and black. The woman would wear bonnets. To this day, many animals go missing on Halloween. I know they do so everywhere, but much more were noticed in Spirit Lake, more than any of the other bigger neighboring towns. Spirit Lake started out as a logging town and died shortly after. There were many old buildings left, and it's advertised as a beautifully historic downtown Spirit Lake with inland empire trails, at least on local radio stations. It also has many haunted buildings. The old movie theater that is now a florist shop, the White Horse Saloon, a run-down building next to the elementary school, a greenhouse next to the park, one commercial building that is no longer standing behind the hardware store. Many locals claim that they have both negative and positive spirits haunting their houses as well. And Spirit Lake is full of good, honest church people. It is widely accepted that ghosts are everywhere, and we pray devoutly for protection for us and our neighbors. There are 2 mountains nearby that also have paranormal or alien activity: Rathdrum Mountain and Hoodoo Mountain. Lights, ghosts, and Bigfoot reports frequently come in from there, all both negative and positive experiences. I have been hunting many times in the Hoodoo area and Inland Empire Paperland as well. I haven't had any paranormal experiences really, but I have seen how a Bigfoot could be hiding. There is so much wilderness and pocketed areas that would provide much coverage and hiding spots. I haven't had any really paranormal interactions with the area, I don't think. One day, I was completely distraught and walked through the woods, and the woods felt comforting and more reassuring than usual. But I'm 90% sure that was just because I love the wilderness. I do know people in groups who have seen stuff that I completely agree with. They are honest, old-fashioned, and churchgoers. I do recognize that Spirit Lake has an above-average drug usage problem and may cause some of the paranormal interactions. But I do feel a negative energy in certain areas from the sorrow and dark behaviors that the land has, and I think the druggies feed the paranormal energy. Some things are just inexplicably complicated and unknown. While Spirit Lake haunts many, it also blesses many with beautiful land, plentiful hunting and fishing, and a tight-knit community that looks out for each other. Not too long ago, I was home alone while watching some 100 Days Minecraft Demon Slayer stuff, and I heard the door to the basement door open. Now, the kitchen door has a specific squeak that I'm very used to by now, due to me living in this house for almost 12 years. This was around 9 a.m. My mom left at 8:45. I was confused because my mom wasn't supposed to be back yet. She was supposed to be gone for around an hour. I got up and I grabbed a bat, knowing that shit was about to go down. I slowly crept towards my kitchen, and by the time I got to the dining room, I heard the door close. This door, by the way, is hard to open at a certain point. I walked into the kitchen and I heard loud rustling coming from the other side of the door. I gripped the baseball bat tight and walked over to the door and opened it. The moment I opened the door to the garage slammed. Note that this door is heavy and it can't really be moved by an air vacuum. I thought it was my mom, and it was just a coincidence, and she was bringing in the recycling bin. But I saw no recycling bin. I still thought it was a coincidence. I opened the door, thinking I'd see my mom. I saw no proof of anybody. Freaks me out even writing this. Also, it's just the more that I think about it, the more it becomes clear that it wasn't anything that science can explain. Haunted by a man who wanted us to find his family pictures? The title alone sounds very odd, but hopefully this will all make sense by the end. My family and I have lived in our current house for about 10 years. Shortly after it was built, the owners put it on the market and we moved in a year later. Before the house was built, it was part of a large field owned by a farmer who lives behind us. There was never any sort of activity in this house before the past month. We've lived in a haunted house before, the kind where you feel you're being watched, footsteps, voices, the works. This house felt like a relief the moment we stepped in because there was nothing. And how could there be? It's so new. Well, last month, after my siblings had gone off to school, I heard very distinct footsteps to the upper level of the house, followed by a voice of an unspecified gender calling, "Hey," before walking down the hallway, pushing open my parents' door. It's broken. At first, I'm thinking somebody must have gotten home extremely early, or maybe the bus didn't come at all. Then I realized that wasn't the case and figured we were being robbed. While I'm internally panicking, I hear one of my dogs trot down the hallway into my parents' room. After hearing the door open, I guess. And I knew he definitely would have barked if he saw a stranger poking around. When I summoned up the courage to look around the other rooms, no one was there. I thought. A little odd, but not a ghost. It couldn't be a ghost. But then the footsteps on the stairs became more persistent. They always went up the stairs and into my parents' room. I started waking up in the middle of the night with the overwhelming feeling of being watched. Worst of all, one night I woke up to someone pushing down on my shoulder. I assumed it was my youngest sister who often gets scared at night, so without opening my eyes, I told her to go to bed. But when there was no response, I got up and found that she was sound asleep in her bed. After that, family members kept complaining of having their shirt tugged on while standing in the middle of the room. At one point, 3 of the blinds pushed down on the living room window, as if someone was looking outside at a neighbor. Like we saw the blinds move. Something was obviously going on, so my parents installed a ring device to see if they could pick up anything. They picked up a man's voice on 2 occasions, with 0 explanation. There's only one male in the house with a voice deep enough to match that, and he wasn't home when it happened. It sounded like it said, "What are you doing?" And on a separate occasion, "Look at this, babe." It was getting really, really creepy, to the point where I couldn't sleep at night from the overwhelming feeling of being watched. But then, one day shortly after that, my family went to a nearby friend's house to dig through their yard with their metal detector. In a pile of trash near the scenic byway, they found a USB with pictures of a man with his family. The wife's name was on the USB thing, and when we looked her up, we found out her husband had died a month ago, unexpectedly. I have no idea why the USB was thrown into this person's yard. Bad fight between them years ago, maybe? There's no way of ever knowing. What I do know is, once we dropped off the USB at the funeral home, the day of the man's service, all the activity in the house came to a halt. No more voices on the ring device, no more footsteps. I can sleep peacefully at night, and I don't feel watched. The house feels safe again. How this man knew to find us or knew that we would find his family pictures is beyond me. I'm just glad he was able to move on now, if that is the case of why we had this activity in the first place. I just want to say that by sharing this story, I'm not looking for judgment. I'm simply sharing the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. When I was 7 years old, my brothers were 3 and just a few months old. From what I remember, our parents were still together at this time, but our dad wasn't with us on this particular day, and not on this particular drive either. I know there was no discussion about where we were going. It wasn't a planned trip. I just remember my brother and I eating sandwiches at the kitchen table one moment, and the next moment, my mom told us to get in the car. She was holding my youngest brother as she walked out the door, and me and my other brother followed. I watched as she put my baby brother in his car seat. After, the rest of us piled into the car. I remember looking over at my brothers. My youngest, he wasn't even buckled into his car seat, and none of us had seatbelts on. I grabbed the lap belt and I put it on my younger brother, and I told him to try to buckle the car seat for the baby. When our mom got back into the car, she asked us if we were ready to take a drive. When I asked where we were going, she just kept talking but not answering me, saying stuff about a fair and cotton candy. My younger brother knew those words very well. We went to the fair not that long before this. I remembered. I asked, where was this fair? I thought the fair was over. Again, she didn't say anything in response, just kept talking. We'd made our way towards the waterfront, and as we were at the top of a big hill that takes you there, my mom said something like, "Whee!" and threw her hands up over the steering wheel. At first, we all laughed and said, "Whee!" too, but she didn't slow down. We started getting to the bottom of the hill, and she kept going. The thing is, there's a stoplight at the bottom of the hill, and you can only go left or right. Going straight would just put you in the center of a pole and on your way to the water. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream as I saw this happening. I screamed. That unleashed some chaos in the car. As soon as I started screaming, my younger brother followed, and then my mom sort of sat in silence, but didn't slow down. I hear the sound of other car horns. Suddenly, the car comes to a screeching halt. By this time, I'd closed my eyes, but I could hear my mom crying hysterically. My baby brother was too, and my younger brother was silent now. Since my eyes were closed, I didn't really know what happened. I just knew that we weren't moving anymore. I heard the door open, and when I opened my eyes, I saw my mom get out of the car, walking through traffic and just onward toward the water. I saw cars stopping, people following her. No one was walking over to us, though. I thought about getting out of the car, but I think I was in shock. All I could think about was how much I wanted to see my dad. Then I remembered my mom had a cell phone, but I didn't know if she brought it. I unbuckled and climbed to the front of the car. I looked around, felt around, but I couldn't find my mom's purse. As I was about to sit back, I heard 2 or 3 people yelling that there were kids in the car. And just as quickly, I saw and heard police cars, an ambulance. Our doors were being opened from each side of the car, and all I could hear was my baby brother screaming. I held my younger brother's hand, and we stepped out of the car and into the back of an ambulance. We were sitting there, and they wrapped us in blankets, asking us if we were okay. All I could get out was that I wanted my dad. I asked if they could please call my dad. Some EMTs sat with us, and it felt like a million years had passed before we saw the police walking our mom back in our direction. Before we could go run and hug her, though, 2 officers put her in the back of a police car. Seeing this, I started crying, but I realized that I was upsetting my younger brother, so I silenced myself, asking over and over where my dad was and where they were taking my mom. The last thing I remember from that day is seeing my dad's car pull up, and the 3 of us getting in his car to drive home. Following this event, there was a period of time where my little brothers and I couldn't see our mom. We were told that she was on a business trip. Then we were told that she was visiting family we'd never met. Being as young as we were, we didn't question any of these details because we didn't even understand what Mom did for a living. Eventually, I learned that my mom had a literal mental breakdown. Concretely, it was more than just a freak out. She had postpartum psychosis. She'd spent months in a psychiatric facility, and eventually, she'd come home, and everything would truly be back to normal. I was like 17 the first time I talked to her about this, and it was still really hard for her to talk about. When I was even older, I found out that my dad wasn't really around much during that time, that he'd had other plans in life, and the timing for his current life wasn't ideal. We've basically discussed the whole ordeal, and I've gotten what I need from her to move on in life. Luckily, I'm the only child that remembers, and of course, I forgive her. But that doesn't change the fact that it's single-handedly the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I grew up in southern Pennsylvania, not far from Gettysburg. When I was 8 years old, my parents decided to build a house on vacant property. It was surrounded by fields, and it was beautiful. I lived with both of my parents and my 2 older brothers, who were 15 and 17 at the time. Though I grew up in the area, we only stayed in the house for 4 years. My first night was not what I expected it to be. I laid in my bed, and I had just closed my eyes. Then I heard a voice that sounded like a soft whisper, about 6 inches from my face, saying, "Help," over and over, just repeating the same word until I fell asleep. I tried my best to forget about it, because I thought there's no way the house could be haunted. It was brand new. About a month goes by, and I'm sitting on my bed, doing what I used to love doing most, which was read. I glanced up and I looked at my doorway because I saw something out of the corner of my eye. At that moment, I'd officially seen a full-body apparition of what appeared to be a soldier from the 1800s, but he didn't see me. He was just walking by my room, very slowly. I still remember every detail of his appearance 20 years later. He was covered in blood and looked like he'd been shot or stabbed. This lasted for about 5 seconds. Still being creeped out, my curiosity got the best of me, and I walked out of my room and I searched all over the house, but I found nothing unusual. About a week or 2 goes by. I'm in my bed trying to fall asleep again, only to be disturbed before I even get the chance to close my eyes. I'm disturbed by this voice. It was very deep and masculine. I couldn't understand a word it was saying because it was speaking in a different language. It sounded annoyed and angry. It happened every night at the exact same time for 2 weeks, before it suddenly stopped. After that, I had a night terror. I'm absolutely terrified of spiders. I'd woken up in the middle of the night. I could see what looked like a tarantula crawling on me in bed. I swear it was there. I definitely saw it. I was panicking. My dad came into the room to check on me and found that everything was okay. Before I could fall asleep, I heard what sounded like 2 men laughing right next to my bed. At this point, I was getting used to fucked up shit happening. One summer, I stayed up late every night so I could watch Hannah Montana at midnight. One night, when the clock struck midnight, I heard my back door downstairs open. Then I heard a woman say my name as if she were calling for me. I'd heard the door shut, followed by footsteps. Then there would be silence. It happened every night for almost 2 months. It never failed. It didn't even bother me at that point. I knew it wasn't my mother because she worked 12-hour night shifts at the hospital almost every night. There were no other females around. But one night, it stopped altogether. One night I was up at midnight and nobody called my name. I went to sleep and everything felt peaceful. I woke up to the sound of someone knocking on my bedroom door. I looked at the clock on my cable box. It was 3 a.m. I assumed it was one of my brothers. I told them to go away. But then the doorknob started turning, but it wouldn't open because the door was locked. I have always slept with my bedroom door open. Always. And I definitely wasn't the one who locked it. The knocking and doorknob rattling went on for what felt like forever, then it stopped. A few minutes later, I hear what sounds like scratching at the door. I think to myself, the fuck? Is that my cat? But then, the knocking, scratching, and turning of the handle started happening at the exact same time. No way in hell my cat could do all 3 at once, let alone the knocking and turning my doorknob. It would happen for about 30 seconds, and then it would stop. It happened at least 5 times. Sometimes the knocking would be so hard, it sounded like pounding. My whole door was shaking. Whatever was on the other side of that door really wanted to come in. It got so bad, it woke my dad up. He heard all of the commotion, and as soon as he opened his bedroom door, it all stopped instantly. He called out to me, but I was too afraid to say anything. He went back into his room and closed the door. But the same scenario repeated itself 3 more times. My dad made me sleep in his room. We never spoke about it, ever. Things seemed to be fine for a while. Then whatever was in my house struck again. My brother had got up to go to the bathroom. He turned the hallway light on, noticed that my bedroom door was closed, as it was across the hall from the bathroom. He comes out of the bathroom, and the hallway light is off, and my bedroom door is wide open. He looked inside my room, and he saw me still sleeping. Everyone else in the house was still sleeping. He woke up my dad and my brother, told them what happened, and they searched the house for a possible intruder, but found nothing. More months go by, and we're all awoken by the smoke detector going off in the middle of the night. We all went downstairs in a panic, just to find out that our stove was on, full blast. Big-ass flame on top of the stove, in the middle of the night. What the fuck? One day, it was just my father and I. My mom was at work as usual. My oldest brother was at work, and my other brother was at baseball practice. I'm downstairs, but I hear what sounded like somebody running upstairs. For forgetting that both of my brothers aren't home, I go up the stairs and I see someone run into my brother's room and slam the door. It was loud. I thought for sure it was my brother, and I wanted to go in there and see what was up and ask why he was running around like that. I opened the door and nobody was there. I watched the door close right in front of me. I felt sick to my stomach just standing there, realizing the only person that was home with me was my father, who was in the shower. I continued to see weird shit all of the time. One day in the middle of the day, I saw my German Shepherd run upstairs, full blast, as if she were chasing something. But I didn't see what she was chasing. Whatever it was went under the bed, and she was viciously growling at it. I thought it was my cat until I saw him sitting on top of the bed and appeared to be sleeping until we bursted in. One night, my cousin was spending the night. We were walking through the living room when she saw the reflection of another person on the glass of our bookcase. Another time, we were in my backyard, and she told me that she saw somebody looking at us through the window on a few occasions, and it definitely wasn't anybody we knew. I remember one day walking down the basement stairs. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I saw what looked like another apparition. Except this apparition looked exactly like my oldest brother, but it also didn't look human. It was almost white and blue, and his eyes were pure black. When he saw me, his eyes got really big, and he looked terrified. He ran away and went into the crawl space. I ran my ass upstairs to find out my brother wasn't even home. I never went back down there after that. A few months later, I was with the same brother, and we were in the living room watching George Lopez late at night. I'm into the show, but he muted the TV. He looked at me and said, "Did you hear that?" I told him no, I didn't hear anything. We sat still for a minute, and then I heard it. Together, we both heard footsteps coming up the basement stairs. My brother grabbed a baseball bat, and we went to the basement to investigate, but to no avail. The rest of our family was sleeping upstairs. The next night, my mom was up late, sitting at the dining room table doing whatever it was that she was doing. Around 3 a.m., the shelf on the dining room wall flew off the wall and put a hole in the wall adjacent to it. We looked at the nails in the wall that held up the shelf, and they were still perfectly straight. We moved out of that house when I was 12. I still experience paranormal things, but not anything comes close to what we dealt with in that house. I believe there were a lot of spirits there, and I'd love to know about what happened there previously to create so much activity. We were a regular church-going family, so I'm sure if there was anything demonic there, that just pissed it off even more. What do you think it could have been? Ghost? Demon? Poltergeist? All of the above? Everything I'm about to tell you happened in the summer of 2020. I believe it was a Saturday. My dad and I were headed to my cousin's graduation party. My dad told me that there was this neat old house, now a museum, with some spooky history behind it on the way. We both love those kinds of things, so I agreed to stop and visit. Once we got there, it was a little less than we expected. Everything was locked up, so we couldn't get a good look inside. The story behind the house, now known as Hex Hollow, goes like this. There was a local man by the name of Nelson Riemeyer, a powwow doctor, who was suspected of being a witch. One late night in November of 1928, 2 men broke into his house and beat him to death. They attempted to burn his body, but it did not burn. To this day, there's still burn marks around where the body was, on the floorboards of that house. Anyways, after a while of going around, taking pictures, and looking around, I thought it might be funny if I jiggled the handle to the front door of the house. Oh, was I so wrong about that. I truly believe I made whatever or whoever was in that house very, very angry. That night when I got home, a really odd feeling came over me. A feeling as if I was being watched. I kept thinking about earlier in the day, at the graduation, my cousin's baby stared at me with complete terror. Along with all of that, out of the corner of my eyes, I started seeing these dark figures dart across the room. I was completely terrified, and I could barely get any sleep at all. I'm unsure how to describe what I saw in my dreams that night, but I'll try my best. There was an array of black and white images that replayed over and over in my head. I would wake up terrified and in tears, fall back asleep, and have the same images repeat themselves. I don't exactly remember what those images were. The only thing that stood out to me is that they were in black and white. The next morning, I still had this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I had no idea what to do other than to go and explain it to my parents. We're a pretty religious family, so we decided to pray, and as soon as we did that, the overwhelming feeling stopped. Although I'm still unsure about some of the things that happened to me that night, I'm fairly certain of 2 things. 1, that Mr. Ray Meyer, or some entity, had attached himself to me for a short period of time. And 2, that I will never mess with something that is not mine, especially if it's from the deceased. My story is a long one. And bear with me, it's a wild ride. I grew up in a house that was built in 1902. I was born in the late 80s, so the house had been remodeled a few times. It was a 2-story house with 3 bedrooms and a tiny bathroom on the 2nd floor. The bathroom was at the top of the stairs, and my room was across the hall at kind of an angle. My sister and my parents had rooms further down a long, narrow hallway. For as long as I can remember, I saw a ghost. I called her Pam. My mom told me I began talking about Pam around the age of 5. And in her words, I never stopped. My mom never believed any of this and just brushed it off as my imagination. Pam was pink and transparent, a see-through, totally pink little girl. Maybe 8 or 9 years old. She walked around only the upstairs, and she never came down the steps. Honestly, I have no idea where the name Pam came from. Growing up, Pam would sit at the top of the stairs, waiting for me to run up to the bathroom after I got home from school. I would walk around her because she was always there, every day. If she wasn't sitting on the step, she would be just sitting on a bed or standing in the rooms or hallway. Harmless for the most part. However, if I ignored her, she would mess up my bedroom while I was gone, doing my paper route. And when I would get back home, my parents would be all sorts of angry over my messy room. But if I said a quick hi, she wouldn't mess with me. She never touched me, and I also never physically saw her move anything with my own eyes. But I would get really scared and nauseous every time she would destroy my room behind my back. so I learned very quickly to say hi to her every day. At the age of 15, my mom had put me into therapy because I was still bringing up Pam here and there. Pam was still always around. I was used to her, and she wasn't doing anything. So she didn't come up in conversation as often. Therapy helped, but not with Pam. When I was 17, my parents decided to put our house up for sale. And I don't know if it was all the people walking through or me packing my stuff, but something triggered Pam, and it got real crazy. About a month before our new house was built and ready to move in, I was asleep in my room. My bed was against the wall, and I could lie on my side and see right into the bathroom. While asleep, I had a dream of Pam, still transparent, standing in the doorway of the bathroom. She pointed up, and for the first time in my life, I heard Pam talk. She said, "Look, that's my mom." I sat up in the bed, and from the light fixture, I saw a dark-haired woman, hanging, lifeless, by a rope. Her boot fell off of her foot, and it hit the floor, and I woke up. Holy shit. I couldn't say anything because my family never saw her. They didn't understand. Pam wasn't in their lives like she was in mine. I didn't really dwell too much on it. It was a dream. Pam was back to sitting on the steps the next day. Life as usual. But 2 weeks later, I had another dream. It started out exactly like the first one. The bathroom light was on, and I could kind of see in while lying on the bed. But this time, I heard weird grunting and splashing. I sat up and saw clear as day the woman that was hanging from the light fixture, only she was alive and holding Pam, no longer translucent, under the water in our bathtub. She was drowning Pam in our bathtub. I don't have any idea what made me wake up, but I couldn't contain my emotion. I ran down the hall and I jumped into my parents' bed, yes, at 17 years old. It was just my mom in there. I think my dad fell asleep on the couch or something, but I was hysterical. I told my mom everything through tears and gasps for air. My mom didn't know what to say. Then in the middle of my sadness, Pam walked into the doorframe of my parents' bedroom. She was transparent again. I quickly laid down really close to my mom. I pulled the covers over my head. I just remember saying, "Oh my God, Mom, she's in here." I held my breath, and seconds later I felt cold, small hands on my back, shoving me against my mom. I kept yelling, "Stop touching me!" My mom could only reply with, "I'm not touching you." This went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only a matter of seconds. When she stopped, she just stood there, at the side of the bed, staring at me. She didn't move. I pulled the covers over my head again and ended up crying myself to sleep while my mom held me. We were both shaking horribly. I moved all my stuff out the next day, and I slept on the floor of our unfinished house the next few nights until my bedroom was done. I never went back. Shortly after my family moved out completely, before the next buyers moved in, the entire back of the house and the entire garage went up in fire. The official cause? Spontaneous combustion. The first people to buy and sell the house after us lasted 10 months there. They called my parents to tell them that they couldn't keep the window or the door shut in the room with the black carpeting. That was my room. I wanted black carpet when I was 15. I saw the house posted a couple of months ago on Zillow, and the only picture of my room shows the door open a crack. You can see a bit of the black carpet, but there's nothing in the room. The rest of the house is furnished. I've tried so hard to find any information about the girl that's in my old house, but there's almost no information at all. Just basic architecture and a lot of online documents. It's the craziest story, I know, but this was my childhood. Part of me feels sorry for Pam, but another part of me knows there's something strong and dark in that house. I know Pam loved me, but no way would I ever go back. I was about 6 or 7 when my mom took me on a hike through some random national park. I know that it was in California, but that's about it. What I remember most is walking through this part that was completely covered in trees, so much so that it made it seem like it was dark outside. As we were walking, I heard someone behind me laugh. It was a child's laugh, and as I turned around, I expected to see another kid, like me. Instead, I saw a little girl. She was a little smaller than me, but she looked almost glowing, and not like a person I'd ever seen. I could see her features, her clothing, her hair, but it's like she was all one color. I tugged on my mom's arm, asking her who was the girl. She turned around to look, but said she didn't see a little girl. And as she said that, I saw the girl sort of disappear as she ran away with the same laugh that she'd greeted me with. I was reading some old stuff I'd written about a possible ghostly encounter. I'm not sure if it fits, but it might. So back in late 2016, I was 19, and if I remember correctly, it was mid to late November. It was around 7 to 8-ish p.m., and I was walking into the kitchen to get a snack. I stopped, thinking I heard someone say my name, and I turned around and looked toward the living room and saw some stranger sitting on my living room sofa. This person was wearing a white anarkali dress, South Asian dress. I'll also add a picture that looks similar to what I'm remembering seeing. It was definitely a woman because of the dress, and the figure was sitting with one leg over the other, and their elbow was on the leg that was over the other. And I never did get a good look at the figure's face, though. I then looked away, and I'm not sure I remember why I did, and then I turned to look again, and nobody was there. Then a few days later, I was in my front yard, sweeping my walkway, and I crouched down to get something I dropped, and when I lifted my head up, I saw someone in front of me. It was a female's figure, and this figure was wearing some pretty kick-ass white high heels and a white anarkali dress, and I immediately recognized it as the dress I'd seen a few days prior. I then stood up, but no one was there. So what do you guys think? Was it possibly a ghost or merely hallucinations? I searched up a woman in white, but it comes back as a story of a woman who died of childbirth and other horrible deaths. I did my weak research for a bit after it happened, and then I gave up because 1, I was lazy, and 2, I couldn't get any answers that seemed to explain. Also, many articles discouraged the thought of seeing ghosts, Nor do I think it was an angel, because all the articles said angels are like a light source. I also didn't really think that it's a jinn either, because they typically bother people for fun and stuff. So I've heard and read, but this seemed super harmless. Anyways, all kinds of comments are welcome. So I went ghost hunting last night and had an experience I will never forget. I'm 23 and I go to college with my best friend who's 20. We joined a local club on campus. Upon meeting the other people in our club, we soon realized that we all shared an interest in folklore and the supernatural. So we decided that the club should meet up for a ghost hunting night on campus just for fun. We met around 9 at night and visited a few hot spots known on campus. While we did get a little bit of interaction, it was nothing major, mostly small EVPs and some captures on Snapchat. The group was having a blast, including my friend and I. By 11:30, the group had dwindled down to less than 6 of us, as most of the group had gone home to go to bed. It was at that point we decided to visit the most active place on campus, which is a residential hall. The residential hall is haunted by a rather famous ghost who I will call Jay. Jay was a young baker who worked at his family's bakery that had been on campus. Jay unfortunately died when he fell and got locked into the large oven and burned to death. The hall is built on top of where the bakery used to be. Jay is known around the hall for pulling pranks, like hiding keys and turning on radios. Our group leader, who I'll call Kay, is an RA at the building and knows all of the spots that Jay frequents. She took us inside and led us to one of the hot spots, which was a computer lab. We all took seats in different rows in the lab. Where I sat, there was nobody around me, and we were quite a few seats apart from one another. This is important. So we sit there. Kay has a spirit box app going on her phone. We start talking to Jay and tell him to move stuff around us to prove that he's there. Every time we do, the spirit box responds with no or not a good idea. I was getting bored and tired at this point, so I started egging Jay on more by telling him to knock stuff over or even mess with me. Finally, I tell Jay to open the closet, to which we get no response. Kay starts talking about how a lot of the activity relates to the closet. It was at that moment that the back of my chair was smacked, hard enough that it let out an audible smack. It was also hard enough that it sent vibrations through my body. I scream immediately and book it to the door, and so does everybody else. We race out of the room, down the hall, where we finally stop and catch our breath. I've never been so shaken in my entire life. There's no way that any of us could have smacked my chair because we were so far apart. I was also sitting completely still, and there was nothing behind me that could have fallen and hit my chair. I also felt a direct strike, straight to my back. I've always believed in ghosts, but I've never had an experience until last night. My friend was recording the whole thing with an audio recorder and caught the moment it happened. Needless to say, I won't be returning to that residential hall anytime soon. When I was younger, me and my best friend did everything together. He was like a brother to me. We were inseparable. Moving on a few years, we were on the phone to each other one morning before we went to work. We were planning out our Saturday night, and he was asking me what beers I would want before we went out. I said I don't mind, and he said okay. Then he said, "I've got to go now. I'll speak to you later, mate." So he went on his way. Little did I know that would be the last time I'd speak to him. You see, on his way to work, he lost control of his car on a slippery road and hit a tree, killing him instantly. I had just left for work when his mom knocked on my mom's door, asking to speak to me. My mom told her I'd just left for work. When my mom asked what was wrong, his mom burst into tears and explained that my best friend had died in a car accident. So I got to work, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then my phone rang. It was a close friend of ours. He was in tears, trying to explain what had happened to my best mate. Not believing him, I phoned my mom to see what was going on, and she explained that his mom had tried to catch me before I left for work to tell me the bad news. After finding out the bad news, I was in total shock. I couldn't believe it. I only spoke to him a few hours earlier. I left work in a daze. It felt like everything around me stood still. The whole day was something like out of the movies. The grief had hit me hard, and I didn't know what to do as the day dragged on and the night drew in. He was all that I could think of. Fighting back the tears, I tried to get some sleep. 3 hours later, I was still awake, so I turned on my side facing the wall, and a bright light shone behind me. Turning over to see what the light was, I was frozen to the spot, staring in disbelief as my best friend, who earlier was killed in a car accident, was standing there, smiling at me, before disappearing. I believe it was his way of telling me he was all right at that moment. I felt a little comfort. This all happened in 2007. To this day, it still affects me, and I miss him so much. So keep your loved ones close, 'cause life is short and can be taken within an instant.